What is up, all my movie freaks out there? Welcome back to another episode of Mike and Juju's Movie Corner. This is season 2, y'all. I am, as always, your boy and your host, Mike.
And I'm Juju, coming at you controversial, just like our subject today.
That's right, and that was a good transition, Juju. Alright, today we're diving into that cult classic that defined teenage rebellion for a whole generation.
That's right, we're talking about Pump Up the Volume, the 1990s coming-of-age drama starring the king of teenage angst himself, Christian Slater.
It's a movie that asks an important question, Juju. What happens when you give a shy kid a shortwave radio and an alter ego?
Chaos, revelation, and some seriously questionable FCC violations.
Alright, for our new listeners, here is how Mike and Juju's Movie Corner works. First, we'll be giving you a spoiler-free overview for anyone who hasn't seen the movie.
Which, if you haven't, what have you been doing with your life for the past 30 plus years?
You nice, Juju. Alright, after that, we're going to break down the plot, dig into some of those behind-the-scenes stuff, and share some trivia. Oh, and don't forget, we're going to give our hot takes.
And as always, we'll end with our Mike and Juju's rating system.
So put on your headphones, turn up the volume, and remember, talk hard. If you somehow never experienced the pirate radio glory of Pump Up the Volume, here is what you need to know without spoiling all that good stuff.
Pump Up the Volume is a 1990 film written and directed by Alan Moyle about a shy high school student named Mark Hunter who moves to a new town in Arizona.
Yeah. And during the day, Mark can barely speak above a whisper and practically invisible at his new school. But at night, he transforms into Hard Harry, a provocative pirate radio DJ broadcasting from his parents' basement.
Hard Harry becomes the voice of teenage delusionment, playing music, taking calls, and going on these wild, profanity-laden rants about society, school, parents, basically everything teenagers hate.
Yeah. And he quickly gains this cult following among the students at his high school, who have no idea the rebellious radio personality is actually that quiet new kid.
The story takes a serious turn when Hard Harry's broadcast inspires real change and begins exposing some genuine corruption at the school.
That's right. It is part teen rebellion fantasy, part romantic drama, and part social commentary about freedom of speech and the power of finding your authentic voice.
The film stars Christian Slater at the absolute peak of his teen heartthrob phase, fresh off Heathers,
Great movie.
doing what he does best, being brooding, charismatic, and just the right amount of creepy.
Yeah, and it also features Samantha Mathis in her very first major film role as Nora. Now, she's a fellow student who becomes determined to uncover Hard Harry's true identity.
The movie has this perfect early 90s alternative soundtrack featuring bands like Concrete Blonde, Pixies, and Sonic Youth that absolutely makes the film.
Definitely. And if you're a fan of movies about teenage outsiders finding their voice, or if you just like seeing authority figures get their comeuppance, this one's for you.
I like that. Just don't expect a lighthearted teen comedy. This one gets pretty dark and deals with some heavy issues like teen suicide, depression, and censorship.
That's right. It does balance that with enough humor and heart, though, that it never feels like an after-school special.
It's the kind of movie that made every awkward teenager want to start their own radio show and stick it to the man.
That's right. Alright, so we're going to talk about the plot breakdown. Now we're getting into that spoiler territory, y'all. If you haven't seen Pump Up the Volume and you want to preserve that mystery, now is the time to skip ahead about 13 minutes or so.
Or just pause and go watch the movie right now. We'll wait.
Yeah, no we won't. So, the film opens with mild-mannered Mark Hunter, played by Christian Slater. He's setting up his pirate radio equipment in his bedroom after his parents go to sleep.
Mark's family has recently moved from the East Coast to Paradise Hill, Arizona, and he's struggling to adjust. He's painfully shy at school and basically has no friends.
Yeah, but when he puts those headphones on and transforms into Hard Harry, he becomes this completely different person. He's confident, he's crude, and super charismatic.
His show is a mix of explicit talk about teenage life, reading letters from listeners, taking phone calls, playing alternative music, and delivering these passionate monologues about the state of the world.
That's right. Every night at 10 p.m., students all over town tune in for his low-power broadcast, not even knowing who's behind the voice that speaks to all of their teenage frustrations.
One of those listeners is Nora De Niro, played by Samantha Mathis, an outspoken student who becomes fascinated with Hard Harry's broadcast and determines to figure out who he really is.
And she's persistent. School itself, Herbert H. Humphrey High, is ran by Principal Creswood, played by Andy Ross. Now, she's obsessed with the school's image and reputation.
She's essentially turned the school into a dystopian nightmare where problem students are expelled to boost the school's academic stats.
Yeah, and early in the film, there's this troubled student named Malcolm. And he writes into Hard Harry about his depression and his thoughts of doing things. He reads this letter on air and tries to reach out to this young man. But shortly after, we do find out that Malcolm has unalived due to his own actions.
Yes. This event marks a turning point where Mark begins to realize the real impact his alter ego is having on his listeners.
And what's he do? Back down, right? Hell no. This is where Hard Harry becomes more political and starts questioning why Malcolm would unalive himself and starts challenging this school's toxic environment. Meanwhile, Nora has figured out Harry's identity. She tracked the radio signal back to Mark's house and she confronts him about it.
Rather than exposing him, she encourages him to keep broadcasting and even helps him by distributing Hard Harry merchandise at school to grow his audience.
Yeah, and as Hard Harry's influence grows, he really starts to receive a lot of letters. And a lot of these letters are exposing corruption at the school, including how this principal is expelling struggling students to artificially raise test scores and secure that government funding. Always about the dollar.
One student, Paige, reveals that she was unfairly expelled despite having learning disabilities that the school refused to accommodate.
Yeah, and that's when Hard Harry broadcasts her story, which leads to more students feeling comfortable enough to come forward with their own experiences of being pushed out of the school.
The authorities, including the FCC and the local police, began trying to track down this illegal broadcast, putting pressure on Mark.
Yeah, because of course, the issue shouldn't be fixing the problems at the school. It should be tracking down freedom of speech, right? But hey, at the same time, a romance develops between Mark and Nora, with her helping him become more confident in his real life and not just behind the microphone.
The school administration starts cracking down on the student body, implementing strict disciplinary measures and trying to identify Hard Harry supporters.
Definitely. And in one of the film's most powerful scenes, Hard Harry announces that he's going to unalive himself on air. This causes mass panic among his listeners. He's really only to reveal that it was all a stunt to demonstrate how the adults only pay attention when things reach that crisis point.
This leads to a climatic confrontation where the FCC finally tracks down Mark's location during a broadcast.
Yeah, and rather than running, Mark decides to face the consequences in the end. He takes his equipment to the school parking lot and broadcasts right out in the open, revealing his identity to everyone.
Students gather to support him as the police and FCC close in. And in the final moments, other students bring their own radio equipment, promising to continue broadcasting even if Mark gets shut down.
That's right. The film ends with Mark being arrested, but having sparked a movement much bigger than himself, with hundreds of students now ready to follow his example and talk hard.
It's a powerful ending that shows how one voice can inspire others to speak up and create real change.
That's right, y'all. Now, let's get behind the scenes. Let's get into some of the fascinating behind the scenes stuff about Pump Up the Volume, Juju.
This film was written and directed by Alan Moyle, who had previously directed Times Square, another film about teenage rebellion and pirate radio.
Yeah. Morrill has said in interviews that the idea for the film came partly from his own experiences with college radio and his interest in the power of underground communication.
The film was produced by New Line Cinema, which was known for taking chances on edgier, youth-oriented films in the late 80s and early 90s.
Definitely. And I think it had a budget of about $7 million, which was decent, but not great for a studio film at that time.
Christian Slater was just 20 when he made this film, and it came hot on the heels of his breakout role in Heathers, where he also played a charismatic, rebellious outsider.
Some interesting parallels between Heathers and Pump Up the Volume. Like, both feature Slater as this darkly charismatic character who challenges the status quo, and both deal with teen suicide.
Slater was really establishing himself as the go-to actor for these complex, edgy teen roles. This was right before he starred in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and Mobsters.
Yeah, and for Samantha Mathis, like being her first major film role, she actually beat out Winona Ryder for the part of this film.
Which is interesting because Ryder has just worked with Slater in Heathers and would have been the obvious choice, but Moyle wanted someone new.
Yeah, and Mathis and Slater did begin dating during this filming, and I think they were together about 3 years, which probably added a lot to that on-screen chemistry, guys.
Definitely. The film was shot primarily in California, despite being set in Arizona. Most of the high school scenes were filmed at Calabasas High School in Los Angeles County.
Yeah, and for the radio broadcast, Slater actually recorded most of Hard Harry's monologues in single takes, y'all. That way he could give them a more authentic stream of consciousness feel.
And he said in his interviews that those scenes were some of the most liberating of his career because he got to just let loose and say whatever came to mind.
Yeah. Alright, so the film's musical supervisor, Kathy Nelson, founder of Frontier Records. Frontier Records was an influential independent punk and alternative label back in the day.
She was responsible for putting together the film's killer soundtrack, which features songs by Concrete Blonde, Pixies, Sonic Youth, and Bad Brains.
Let's go. And this soundtrack became almost as cult favorite as the film itself, y'all. It captured that perfect early 90s alternative rock moment right before grunge was about to explode.
Wow. The film's title comes from the song Pump Up the Volume by M.A.R.R.S., which was a huge dance hit a few years earlier, though, interestingly, that song doesn't actually appear in the movie.
That's right. But the Hard Harry character was partially inspired by real-life radio personalities like Howard Stern, Rush Limbaugh, these people who were becoming increasingly influential in the late 1980s.
Though Hard Harry is a lot more countercultural and anti-establishment than either of those guys.
Yeah, and when this film was released in August of 1990, it received positive reviews from all the critics, who did praise Slater's performance and the film's authentic portrayal of teenage alienation.
Wow. But it wasn't a huge commercial hit, making only about $11.5 million at the box office against its $7 million budget.
That's right. And the film originally received an X rating from the MPAA because of its sexual content and language, which would have severely limited its release.
Moyle had to make several cuts to get it down to an R rating.
That's right.
Including trimming some of Hard Harry's more explicit monologues.
And even with that R rating, the film's frank discussions of teen sexuality, suicide, and drug use made it really controversial in some circles.
But that controversy only added to its appeal for teenage audiences, who embraced it as a film that actually took the problem seriously.
Yes. Trivia. It is time for some random trivia that'll make you the hit of any Pump Up the Volume viewing party, which you should definitely host, guys, by the way.
Just make sure you have a good speaker system for that soundtrack.
That's right. Alright, so Christian Slater's radio DJ voice in the film was highly inspired by Jack Nicholson. Like, he admitted in interviews that he was basically doing his Nicholson impersonation for the Hard Harry scenes.
Once you know that, you can't unhear it.
Right?
It's that same sardonic drawl Nicholson is famous for.
Yeah. Hard Harry's catchphrase, so be it, was actually improvised by Slater during filming and wasn't in the original script at all.
It became so associated with the film that it was used in a lot of the marketing materials.
Yeah, and the character's full radio name, Happy Harry Hard On, had to be shortened to just Hard Harry in most of the promotional materials because of censorship concerns.
I like that. Which is ironic for a movie about fighting censorship.
Yeah. And don't forget, the shortwave radio equipment shown in the film was fictional. And the technical advisor made sure that everything Mark did on screen was 100% realistic.
Nice. Although in reality, his broadcast range would have been much smaller than what's depicted in the film.
Yeah.
He wouldn't have reached the entire town with that setup.
Also, the film's writer-director, Alan Moyle, would go on to make Empire Records, incredible movie 5 years later, which has a similar theme for young people united by their love of music and rebellion against authority.
It's like a spiritual sequel in many ways. Just set it in a record store instead of a pirate radio station.
Right. And the high school's name, Hubert H. Humphrey High. Now that's a reference to the former Vice President, Lyndon B. Johnson, who was known for his liberal politics.
The irony being that the school itself is anything but progressive or liberal.
Ellen Green, who plays Mark's mother. Now, she was well known for her role as Audrey in both the stage and film versions of Little Shop of Horrors.
And Scott Pauling, who plays Mark's father, would later play Red Skull in the 1990 Captain America movie, which, let's be honest, no one saw.
Alright, the film features an early role for Seth Green as a student named Joey, before he became famous for Austin Powers and Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
He's only in a few scenes, but it's fun to spot him in his teen years.
Alright, the famous penis joke Hard Harry tells in the film was actually a last-minute addition that Christian Slater improvised.
And it became one of the most quoted lines from the movie.
Right? Also, the Leonard Cohen song Everybody Knows features prominently in the film and plays over that opening sequence.
Cohen's gravely voice and cynical lyrics perfectly set the tone for Hard Harry's worldview.
The character of Nora was partly inspired by Abby Hoffman's daughter, y'all. According to Mole, who wanted to create a female character with strong political convictions. Let's go.
For those who don't know, Abby Hoffman was a famous political activist in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. Alright, so the film was released the same month as Darkman and Men at Work.
August 1990 was apparently a big month for movies that would later develop cult followings.
Yeah, and despite the film's focus on music, Christian Slater actually doesn't have much musical background at all and had to be coached for scenes where Mark is handling those records.
But he did do all of his own broadcasting scenes with no voice double.
Hell yeah. And the school newspaper in the film is called the Clarion, which is actually a common name for school papers. But it is also a type of trumpet fitting for a film about making a lot of noise.
That's either a clever bit of symbolism or a total coincidence.
Yeah, who knows? Alright, so the film's editor was Andy Keir, who had previously edited another teenage rebellion classic we all know and have covered on this channel, The Breakfast Club.
So he definitely knew how to piece together authentic teen angst. Nice.
Alright, let's talk about the legacy, Juju. Pump up the volume. Because I really think that this film had more cultural impact than its box office numbers would probably suggest to people.
Absolutely. It's one of those movies that found its true audience on home video and through word of mouth.
That's right. And while it wasn't a huge theatrical hit, it did become a huge cult classic among teenagers who felt that it spoke directly to their experiences in a way that other films at the time just did not.
The film came out at this interesting cultural moment right as alternative music and culture were about to break into the mainstream with grunge and the rise of indie film.
Yeah, and it also predicted the shift featuring music from bands like the Pixies, who were still fairly underground in 1990, y'all, but who would become massively influential in the 90s.
And the film's central theme about finding your authentic voice and speaking truth to power resonated especially with Generation X, who were often portrayed as apathetic, but actually has strong political convictions.
Right. And that character of Hard Harry become this sort of archetypal rebel figure, like the shy kid with that secret powerful voice that you can really see echoed in later films and TV shows.
You can definitely draw a line from Hard Harry to bloggers, podcasters, and social media personalities who build platforms around speaking their unfiltered truth.
Right? And in many ways, the film anticipated how communication technology would eventually evolve to give individuals their own broadcasting power that was once only reserved for major media companies.
It's like Hard Harry was the original influencer,
That's right.
just with a shortwave radio instead of YouTube or TikTok.
Think about that. And for Christian Slater, this film, along with Heather's, of course, cemented his status as that brooding teen anti-hero of his generation.
He basically cornered the market on playing intelligent, sardonic outsiders with a dark streak.
Right? That's a good way to put that, Juju. And it's also interesting how the film deals with the serious issues like teen suicide, censorship, and mental health in a way that was pretty ahead of its time for a teen movie back then.
Most teen films of that era were either pure comedies or melodramas.
Not this one.
But Pump Up the Volume had this political edge that made it feel more substantial.
Yeah, and it also became a touchstone for discussions about freedom of speech and the importance of alternative media voices, y'all.
Hard Harry's pirate radio station feels like a precursor to the independent media landscape we have today,
Right?
where anyone can potentially reach a mass audience.
Thank you. One aspect of the film's legacy, let's be honest, that soundtrack, which captures that perfect moment in alternative music history right before Nirvana's Nevermind would blow up and change everything.
The soundtrack album is almost like a time capsule of where alternative rock was in the 1990s, featuring bands that were just on the cusp of breaking through.
Yeah. It was also a significant for its portrayal of teen sexuality in a way that was frank and non-judgmental at the time, showing masturbation and sexual discussion as normal parts of teenage life.
Which was pretty revolutionary for a mainstream film aimed at teens. It didn't moralize or try to scare kids about sex like so many other movies of that era.
Yeah, and in terms of direct influence, you can see echoes of Pump Up the Volume in later films and TV shows about outsider teens finding their voice, from anything from Ghost World to Lady Bird.
And the whole concept of an anonymous voice rallying a community has been revisited in shows like Gossip Girl and 13 Reasons Why.
Yeah, though I would argue none of those successors captured the raw authenticity that made Pump Up the Volume so damn special, y'all.
The film has also maintained relevance because its themes of teenage isolation, the struggle to communicate authentically, and the fight against institutional corruption are unfortunately still very relevant today.
Ain't that the truth? And if anything, in the age of all the school incidences and teen mental health crisis, this film's message about the importance of listening to young people feels more urgent than ever, I'd say.
And in an era of increased concern about online influence on teens, the film offers an interesting perspective on the potential positive power of having a platform.
Yeah, definitely. Hard Harry ultimately uses his voice to expose corruption and build a community, showing how media can really be a force for positive change when it's used thoughtfully, y'all.
The film would probably be made very differently today with podcasts or streaming instead of radio, but its core message would still resonate.
Yeah, and it's one of those rare teen movies that doesn't feel dated. I mean, it's got emotional content, even though the technology and fashion have changed dramatically.
The film's enduring legacy might be the best summed up by Hard Harry's famous line. You ever get the feeling that everything in America is completely fucked up?
Now that sentiment of teenage frustration with the adult world is timeless, y'all. Which is why Pump Up the Volume continues to find new fans decades after it came out. Let's go. let's get into personal takes and ratings, y'all, for this movie. Juju, what stands out to you about this film after all these years?
For me, it's how the film takes teenage angst seriously without condescending. It doesn't treat teenage problems as trivial or something they'll grow out of.
Right? I agree, exactly. It recognizes that the pain and alienation teenagers feel is real and valid, y'all. That's what makes it connect so deeply with the audience.
Christian Slater's performance is really the heart of the film for me. The contrast between shy Mark and confident Harry feels totally believable.
Yeah, he manages to show that they're the same person at their core. Just different expressions of the same voice trying to be heard, y'all.
The scene that always gets me is when Harry is talking to the suicidal listener, Malcolm, trying desperately to keep him on the line and failing. It's heartbreaking.
It really is. That moment when he realizes the real impact his words have, like, that's the turning point where the film goes from being just another teen rebellion fantasy to something that has real stakes involved.
If I had to critique anything, it's that some of the supporting characters feel a bit one-dimensional,
Right.
especially the school administrators, who are pretty cartoonishly evil.
Yeah, and the principal, Crestwood, I think, is definitely more of a symbol than a fully fleshed out character, you know? But I do think that works in the context of this film. Like, that's partly about how adults appear in teenage imagination, you know?
Fair point. I also think the romance between Mark and Nora sometimes feels a bit rushed.
Yeah.
Like they needed to check that box for a teen movie.
Though I do like how Nora is that confident one pursuing Mark, which flips that typical gender dynamics of a teen romance from that era.
Absolutely. Samantha Mathis brings so much energy to that role. Nora feels like she could have carried her own movie.
Yeah, definitely. And again, soundtrack. It is a standout element for me. It's not just background music, y'all. It is integral to the story and the characterization of this film.
Especially the way Leonard Cohen, everybody knows, establishes a cynical worldview that Hard Harry is fighting against and embodying at the same time.
So, on our famous Mike and Juju scale, where do you rate this one?
This is a definite 9 out of 10 microphones for me. It's not perfect, but it captures something authentic about teenage experience that still resonates today.
Good point. Yeah, it's a strong 9 out of 10 microphones for me too. Like, it's one of those films that somehow was ahead of its time and has actually gained a lot of relevance rather than lost it over all the years since it was made.
It's a film that respects its teenage audience enough to show them the truth about how difficult growing up can be, but also offers hope that their voices matter.
Yeah, and it also does all of that by still being entertaining and avoiding feeling like a lecture.
The film's message about the importance of speaking up and being authentic is something that transcends generations.
So, for anyone who hasn't seen it, is it worth tracking down, Juju?
Absolutely, especially for teenagers who feel unheard or anyone who remembers what that felt like.
Yeah, that any fan of that 90s alternative culture, like, this is practically a required viewing, guys.
So there you have it. Pump Up the Volume gets our definite 9 out of 10 microphones rating, a cult classic that's earned its status.
That's right, y'all. Alright, well, that wraps up our deep dive into Pump Up the Volume, from pirate radio to teenager evolution.
So be it.
Nice callback. Before we go, let's remind everyone to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next episode.
Next week.
No. You don't get to tell him that. You already know. He always stops me, I'm stopping him. Y'all have to wait and find out, guys. But from teenage rebellion to whatever comes next, we're really hitting all of those essential 80s and 90s Gen X movies that we grew up with.
Absolutely. And don't forget to check out our other shows.
Yeah, so do not miss out on all of the content that we work so hard at.
If you have suggestions for movies you want us to cover, drop them in the comments below.
That's right, y'all. As always, I am your boy and your host, Mike, and we'll see you next time on Mike and Juju's Movie Corner. Y'all stay cool, movie freaks.